sister said, loud enough for the front pew to hear. Abeba stood alone at the casket, clutching the unpaid funeral bill she'd been told to handle herself. Her husband stared at his phone. The funeral director cleared his throat. Nobody in that room knew whose signature approved his salary every month. $12,000 for a woman who was already gone. Grief does not change reality, sweetheart. Abeba, baby, whatever it is you think you have, this is not the day to use it. Kwame Whitfield rehearsed that in the car. He said it standing up in a room with a pastor in it, while a woman from his office watched from the back row in a gray dress with her hands folded. His mother nodded along the way she nodded at sermons. His sister laughed. And Abeba stood beside her mother's casket, holding a bill, and she did not cry. Down in her purse, underneath the folded invoice, was a small brass key on a faded blue ribbon her father had left her 11 years ago. She had never once used it. He had no idea that the woman he was leaving to stand alone in that room was the one who quietly held everything he loved. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, or unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It's not always been this cruel. 6 years earlier, he cried at her father's funeral. He held her hand the whole service. He carried the flowers to the car himself. Abeba kept looking for that man. She was an engineer once, a good one. She could read a load calculation the way some women read a recipe, and she did it for 11 years, until the Tuesday her mother's hand shook so hard the fork went off the plate. Ruth Rowe was diagnosed on a Tuesday. Abeba resigned on a Friday. It is temporary, she told Kwame. 6 years. 6 years of lifting a grown woman out of a bathtub. 6 years of pill organizers and parking garages and sleeping upright in a vinyl chair. She learned her mother's medications the way she used to learn steel grades. She never complained. Kwame complained plenty. Other men have wives who contribute, he said one night, eyes on his laptop. Abeba set his plate down and went back to the sink. He was climbing. He wanted a wife climbing beside him. Instead, he had one smelling like a sick room. Houston and Cole was a 40-year-old firm downtown with marble in the lobby. Kwame came in with holes in his shoes and clawed his way to senior associate in 8 years. He was good. That was the terrible part. He was actually good. And he was starving. In his 8th year, a merger came, a larger outfit out of Atlanta. Whoever brokered it would sit at the head of the table when the dust settled. Kwame intended to be that man. The woman running the diligence was Adrienne Boyce, 34, sharp suits, sharper questions. Her name started coming home with him. Adrienne thinks the numbers are soft. Adrienne wants me on the call at 6. Abeba noticed how his voice changed on the second syllable. She noticed the calls that ran past 10. She noticed a photo on the firm's website, Kwame in the second row at a groundbreaking, and a woman standing so close their sleeves touched. She said nothing. On Sunday dinner, Vernita passed the rolls. It is a beautiful thing what you do for your mother. Sweet. But it is not a career, is it? Renee laughed into her glass. Abeba passed the rolls on. By the 5th year, Kwame had stopped coming to the hospital. By the 6th, he stopped asking. In the last 3 weeks of Ruth Rowe's life, when the hospice nurse came twice a day and Abeba slept in a recliner beside the bed, Kwame slept somewhere else 4 nights out of 7. Ruth died on a Sunday morning in March, holding her daughter's hand. The last thing she said was not goodbye. Go get the key, baby. Abeba thought it was the medication. It was not. The funeral was set on Saturday. Wednesday, she asked Kwame for the money. He said he would handle it. Thursday, she asked again. He said he was handling it. Friday night, she stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him iron a shirt for a dinner she had not been invited to, and she asked one more time. He did not look up from the ironing board. "We will discuss it after." "After what, Kwame? She goes in the ground Saturday." "Then she goes in the ground Saturday." The iron hissed. Abeba went upstairs and did not sleep. Saturday morning, Bethel Rest smelled like lilies and floor polish. Ruth Rowe lay in the middle of the room in the blue dress she wore to her own husband's funeral because Abeba had picked it and because it was the one her mother had loved. 50 people came, churchwomen, 2 nurses who had come on their day off, a man from the block who had cut Ruth's grass for 19 years and would not accept $1 for it. Abeba stood at the head of that casket in a black dress she had owned for a decade and greeted every one of them by name. She held it together for 1 hour and 40 minutes. The funeral director was a soft-spoken man named Mr. Tillery. He waited until the room thinned. Then he came to her with the invoice folded once, held low, the way a man holds something he is ashamed to be holding. "Mrs. Whitfield, I hate to do this here." "It's all right. The balance has to be settled before the internment. It's the policy, not me." $12,400. Abeba turned and found her husband in the 3rd row in a suit on his phone. "Kwame?" He held up one finger. 50 people watched a man hold up one finger to his wife at her mother's funeral. "Kwame?" He stood, he came up the aisle, he glanced at the paper, and then he did the thing that Abeba would remember for the rest of her life. He smiled, small, patient, the way you smile at a child asking for a toy in a store. $12,000, he said, not quietly. "Kwame? For a woman who is already gone." The room heard it, all of it. A churchwoman in the 2nd row put her hand over her mouth. Vernita came up the aisle then, unhurried, and stood beside her son with her purse over her forearm. "Abeba, baby, he has been carrying this household for 6 years. She was my mother, and she is with the Lord now, and the Lord does not send an invoice." Vernita patted her arm. "Grief does not change reality, sweetheart." Renee did not even stand up. She just said it from where she sat, loud across the pews. "You should have married somebody with money." Somebody laughed. Abeba never found out who. And in the back row near the door, a woman in a gray dress rose halfway and sat back down. Adrienne Boyce, at a funeral for a woman she had never met. Mr. Tillery looked at the floor. The pastor looked at Kwame. Nobody moved. Abeba stood in the middle of that room with her mother 6 feet behind her in a blue dress, and she felt every single eye. "Give me your card," she said. "Abeba, give me your card and I will pay you back." Kwame put his hands in his pockets. No. That was the word. Not a speech, not an argument. No. He turned and walked out, and his mother followed him, and his sister followed her, and the woman in the gray dress went last, and the door swung twice behind them. 50 people watched them go. Abeba did not scream. She turned back to Mr. Tillery. "Can she stay here until Monday?" "Ma'am, can she stay here until Monday? That is all I am asking you." Mr. Tillery, God bless that man, said yes. So Ruth Rowe did not go in the ground that Saturday. Her daughter drove home, sat in the driveway with both hands on the wheel until they stopped shaking, and then went inside and found her husband's suit already hung up and his shoes already off, like a man who had done nothing at all that day. He was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing. "No, it's fine, it's handled," he said. "She'll come around, she always does." Abiba stood in the dark hallway and listened to her husband laugh. Then she went upstairs and took her father's old address book out of the drawer, and she found a name on a page she hadn't turned in 11 years. Grant and Associates, Estates and Trusts. Elias Grant was 61, silver at the temples, and he did not look surprised to see her Monday morning. "I have been waiting on you for 11 years, he said. She told him what happened. She told it flat, in order, without one wet word in it. Elias listened with his hands folded. When she finished, he was quiet a long time. "Your father left you more than you think." "My father drove a Buick for 19 years. "Your father was a careful man. That is not the same as a poor one." "How much?" "Wrong question." "Then what is the right one?" "In time." He pushed a legal pad across the desk. "Today, one thing. Do not sign anything. Not a card, not a form, not a paper your husband slides across a kitchen cable. Not one." "Why?" "Because I do not yet know what he has already signed." Abeba went very still. "Mr. Grant, my mother's last words to me were, 'Go get the key.'" His face changed for the first time. "She said that out loud?" "Yes." He looked at the calendar on the wall behind her. "Then we have less time than I hoped." Abeba buried her mother on Wednesday. She paid for it herself. She sold her engineering tools first, 11 years of them in a steel case, to a man off an online listing who came to the driveway and counted out $900 in 20s. Then her wedding set, $1,600 at a shop on Delmar with bars on the window. Then her father's Buick, which had sat under a tarp in her mother's garage since 2013 and which she had promised herself she would never sell. $4,200. It still was not enough. Mr. Tillery took what she had and wrote "paid in full" on the invoice and would not discuss it further. 11 people came Wednesday. It rained. Kwame did not. That night, Abeba sat on the floor of her mother's empty house with the tarp from the Buick folded in her lap, and she cried for 4 hours, alone, where nobody could see it. It was the only time she did. 26 days remained. She did not know that yet. Kwame came home Thursday in a good mood. He had won something. She could tell by the way he took the stairs. "They're announcing at the anniversary dinner," he said, pulling off his tie. "Merger goes to signature that night. Halston's putting my name up." "Congratulations." "You could sound like you mean it." He opened the closet. "You know what your problem is? You've been sitting still so long you forgot what a moving man looks like." Abeba folded a towel. "Adrian says the same thing," he added. "Does she?" "She says a man can't wait forever on somebody else's life to finish happening." He said it like philosophy. Then he went out again at 9 and came back at 2, and Abeba lay in the dark doing what she had always done best, not crying, calculating. Friday she went to her mother's house to start clearing it out. Vernita's car was already in the driveway. Inside, 2 men in coveralls were carrying Ruth Rowe's dining table down the front steps. Vernita stood in the living room with a clipboard. "Abeba, perfect timing." "What is this?" "Kwame said the estate would need liquidating, and I know a fair dealer." "Vernita, smile. You are grieving. Somebody has to think practically." "That is my mother's table." "And it is going to a good home." Vernita touched her wrist. "You cannot afford this house, baby. Let people help you." Abeba looked at the wall where her mother's china cabinet had stood, bare, 2 hooks and a rectangle of clean paint. She said, "Get out of my mother's house." She said it so quietly that Vernita heard it perfectly. They got out. That night, on a public page, Adrian Boyce posted a photograph of an empty living room wall. Some spaces feel better once the past is removed. Abeba saw it at 11 o'clock at night and understood 2 things at once. Adrian had been inside that house, and Adrian wanted her to know it. 22 days. Saturday, Abeba drove to Halston and Cole and parked across the street with a cup of coffee going cold in the holder. Kwame's car was there, on a Saturday. At 2, he came out. Adrian came out 4 steps behind him and caught up at the curb, and he put his hand flat on the small of her back, the way a man does when he is not thinking about it anymore. They went into a restaurant on 9th. Abeba did not follow them in. She went into the building instead. Patrice at the front desk had loved Walter Rowe and never liked Kwame Whitefield, and when she saw Abeba, she came around the counter and hugged her for a long time. "Baby, I heard about Saturday. The whole building heard." Abeba asked her nothing. Patrice offered it anyway. "That woman had your husband in the conference room till midnight 3 nights running last month, and I'll tell you what bothered me. She wasn't looking at drawings. She had the archive boxes pulled up from storage, the old ownership files. She asked me where the pre-2000 records went." "What did you tell her?" "That they're sealed." Patrice's mouth tightened. She did not like that. Abeba stood in that marble lobby and did the arithmetic. The archive boxes came up in February. Her mother died March 8th. Adrian Boyce had been digging for something in this building before Ruth Rowe was even gone. 19 days. Elias called her in on a Tuesday and did not offer coffee. He said 4 sentences. Her father had not been a draftsman. He had been the man who saved that firm in 1994 with everything he had and everything he could borrow. And he took no title, only paper, through a holding company he named after the street she was born on. Ardmore Street. Ardmore Holdings. 61% of Houston and Cole. Abeba sat with her hands flat on the desk. "Kwame has worked there 8 years. "Yes." "He does not know." "Nobody knows. That is what your father paid for." "Who has been holding it since he died?" Elias looked at her. "Your mother." The room went quiet. "There is more," he said, "but not yet." She found the rest herself, 3 days later, in the trunk of her husband's car. Kwame kept a leather folio there. He had for years, because he did not trust the house, which had always struck her a strange thing for a man to say about his own home. She waited until he was in the shower. Merger documents, firm letterhead, a partner slate with his name typed third, and on page 9 one paragraph highlighted in yellow by somebody else's hand. "Consent of the majority holder of record, Ardmore Holdings, shall be required prior to execution." In the margin, in handwriting that was not his, 4 words. Who actually controls this? She photographed every page, put the folio back exactly as she found it, and closed the trunk. Upstairs, the shower shut off. She was in bed with her eyes closed before he came down the hall. She did not sleep. She was not afraid. She was thinking. 14 days. The thing that took the floor out from under her came on a Thursday morning. Elias read it out loud from her father's trust instrument, slowly, like a man diffusing something. "Upon the death of the life beneficiary, the named successor shall affirm the successorship in writing within 30 days. Failing timely affirmation, the holding shall pass by default to the operating partners of record." Say it plain. If you do not claim it within 30 days of your mother's death, the majority of that firm gets divided among its partners. When did my mother die? 19 days ago. 11 days. There is more. He set down a second page. Adrian Boyce was approved to partner on the 1st of March. March 1st. Ruth Rowe died March 8th. Abeba sat back in the chair. She saw the archive boxes, the highlighted paragraph, the empty wall, the gray dress at the back of the funeral parlor, and her husband standing up in front of 50 people, taking his time about it. She is not chasing my husband. No, she is chasing the 30 days. Yes, and he kept me broke and grieving and fighting over a funeral bill so I would never have a quiet hour to look up. Elias did not answer. That was the answer. Abeba stood. 11 days, she said. We do not waste one. The key did not open a safe deposit box. It opened the bottom drawer of a drafting desk in a storage room at Houston & Co., because in 13 years nobody in that building had been able to throw away Walter Rowe's desk. Patrice let her in on a Saturday. The drawer stuck. Then it gave. A photograph of a young man in a hard hat in front of a half-built parking structure, the original once with her name on it. Abby girl, if you are reading this, your mother is gone, and you are angry and you do not know what to do with your hands. I never told you because money changes how people love you, and I wanted to watch you get loved for free. You have been. I saw it. Now go be who you already are. Do not be loud about it. Be right about it. She read it 4 times, sitting on the floor of a storage room. Then she picked up her phone. File the affirmation today and hold the merger consent unsigned. I want it sitting there where all of them can see it and wonder who Ardmore is. Abeba, do you understand what you are holding? 61%, and every seat in that building, including his. One more thing, Elias said. 200,000 was borrowed against your mother's house 11 months ago. She was in a hospital bed. She could not hold a pen. The signature is smooth and even, and the examiner says it's not hers. The money went to a shell company. The original filing lists one member, A. Boyce. Abeba stood in her father's storage room with a brass key in her palm. Hold it, she said. He's going to stand up in front of that whole firm in 9 days and tell everybody exactly who he is. I want him to do it first. The atrium at Houston & Co. 40 years. White cloth, a string quartet, the project wall lit from below. Merger announced at 9. Signed at 9:15. Kwame wore a new suit. He had not spoken to his wife in 6 days and had not noticed. At 8:40, Abeba walked in wearing black, alone, with a folder under her arm. Kwame crossed the room fast. What are you doing here? I was invited. By who? By the majority holder. He laughed because he did not understand yet. At 9, Old Man Halston took the microphone, said the words everybody came for, and then said the ones nobody expected. Before we sign, our majority holder has asked to address the firm. The room went still. Ardmore Holdings has controlled this company since 1994. For 31 years, I kept a promise to a man most of you never knew was your boss. That promise expired this month. He looked out. Mrs. Whitfield. 200 faces turned. Abeba walked up. She did not hurry. My father was Walter Rowe. Some of you knew him as the quiet man who fixed your drawings and never took the credit. He owned 61% of this firm. It passed to my mother. 19 days ago, my mother died, and it passed to me. 9 days ago, I claimed it. Somebody dropped a glass. This merger cannot execute without my signature. I have not given it. I want to say why." She turned one page. "Because 12 days ago, the man who brokered it stood in a funeral parlor and told me my mother was not worth $12,000. His mother agreed. His sister told me I should have married somebody with money. I buried her Wednesday with my tools, my wedding ring, and my father's car." Nobody breathed. "He has earned every promotion he ever got in this building. His salary was approved every month by a company my family owns, and he never knew it, and it should not have mattered." She looked at him for the first time. It should not have mattered. "Abeba, baby, let's do this at home." "We are not at home. We are where you did it." Adrian Boyce was already moving toward the door. "Miss Boyce, sit down. The second part is yours." Adrian stopped. 11 months ago, $200,000 was borrowed against my mother's house when she lay in a hospital bed, unable to hold a pen. The money went to a shell company. The original state filing lists one member, A. Boyce. I have no idea what that is. You amended the filing in June. Amendments do not erase the original. They sit on top of it. Kwame turned to Adrian. 200 people watched him do it. "Tell them it was your idea." Adrian looked around the room, calculated, and made the only move she had left. "He forged it. I told him not to. I have the messages." She had 14 months of them, and in among them, dated 3 weeks before Ruth Rowe died, one line that finished the story. 30 days from the funeral. Keep her buried in it. She will never look up in time." Abeba read it out loud to the whole room. Then she folded the page. "She did not just refuse to bury my mother. He used her funeral as a clock." Vernita Whitfield rose halfway out of her chair and sat back down, and for the first time in 20 years, that woman had nothing polite to say. The forgery was a felony. The wires made it federal. Adrian testified, and it still cost her every. Abeba did not attend the sentencing. She was busy. The merger died. She rebuilt the firm instead. She had her father's drafting desk carried up from storage into the corner office. She made Patrice office manager and doubled her salary. She restarted her father's apprenticeship program and put 9 kids in the first class, 6 of them girls, all of them from schools where nobody had ever told them they could do math for a living. And in October, she opened a storefront 2 blocks from Bethel Rest, the Ruth Rowe Fund. It buries people. That is all it does. When a family cannot cover the cost of putting their people in the ground with dignity, they walk in, they sit down, somebody hands them coffee, and it is handled. Nobody makes them explain. 406 families the first year. On the wall behind the desk hangs a small brass key on a faded blue ribbon, framed with no plaque under it. Abeba stopped by on a Thursday in December and stood in the doorway watching a young woman with a folder in her lap and her shoulders up around her ears, the way people sit when they've already been told no somewhere else. The volunteer slid the paper back across and said, "It's handled." The young woman put her face in her hands. Abeba stepped out into the cold and let the door close. She did not cry. She had done that already, on the floor of her mother's empty house, alone, the night she buried her with her own 2 hands. If this story moved you, like the video from, and I will see you in the next unforgettable story.
He canceled his wife's last flight home from her mother's funeral, then handed the only boarding pass to his mistress. Watch the plane leave you without you, he said with a smile. She never argued. She simply looked at the departure screen. Seconds later, the gate agent read something, froze, and quietly stepped away from the counter. Her name was Simone, and she had just buried her mother. Now she stood in a bright terminal, still carrying that grief like a stone in her chest, and the people who should have carried it with her were the ones about to break her. The funeral had ended 3 hours earlier, too statement. Loretta had been sick a long time, and Simone had flown alone to sit by the bed, to hold the thin hand, to whisper the last words a daughter gets to whisper. Her husband had not come. He said work. He said the timing was bad. He said a lot of things that a grieving woman is too tired to argue with. But he came to the airport. Watch closely, because this is where it starts. Darius was already standing near the gate when Simone walked up, still numb, still wearing the quiet of the graveside. He was a tall man, handsome in the way that made people forgive him too easily. And he was smiling. That smile should have warned her. In all their 14 years, that particular smile had only ever meant he had already decided something, and she was the last to know. Beside him stood a woman, younger, polished, a carry-on at her feet like she was going somewhere. Simone had never seen her before, but she felt it in her chest the way you feel cold water before it touches you. "Simone," Darius said, easy as Sunday. "There's been a change." "A change," she repeated. Her voice was sand. "The account couldn't cover 2 seats on the last flight." He shrugged, like the sky itself had made the decision. He turned to the younger woman and put his hand at the small of her back. "This is Brianna. She's coming home with me tonight. Now, let me ask you something. What do you do when the floor drops out and there's a crowd behind you? Do you scream? Do you beg? Do you fall?" Simone did none of those things. Brianna smiled, slow and pleased, and reached over and took the single boarding pass right out of Darius's hand, as if she'd earned it, as if it had always been hers. "Watch the plane leave you without you," Darius said. And here's the part they didn't understand. Simone didn't cry. She didn't grab his sleeve. She turned her tired eyes to the big departure screen glowing above the counter, and she just read it. Gate, flight number, boarding in 40 minutes. She read it the way a woman reads a thing she already knows the ending to. Her silence was never surrender. But she wasn't alone in her humiliation. Oh no, because 2 more people stepped out of the little crowd, and they were smiling too. Gloria, her mother-in-law, had never liked her. 14 years, and the woman still introduced Simone as the girl Darius married, like a mistake that hadn't finished happening. And Andre, Darius's younger brother, had a phone up, already recording, already narrating under his breath like this was entertainment. "Some women marry up and forget where the door is," Gloria said, loud enough for strangers to hear. A few of them looked. A few of them laughed the small, nervous laugh people laugh when cruelty is happening and they're glad it isn't aimed at them. "Smile for the camera." Andre tilted his phone toward Simone's exhausted face. "This one's going everywhere." An older woman near the window seats looked away, ashamed for all of them. A boy tugged his father's sleeve and asked why the men were being mean to the sad lady. Nobody stepped in. Nobody ever does. That's the thing about public cruelty. It works because everyone assumes someone braver will speak, and no one is braver. "You could at least say goodbye," Brianna said, tucking the boarding pass into her purse with 2 slow fingers. "That's the polite thing, isn't it?" Darius chuckled. "She was never much for goodbyes. Were you, baby?" He said the word baby the way you'd flick something off your shoe. And still, watch her. Simone did not answer. Her jaw did not tremble. Her eyes did not fill. She had spent the whole day at a graveside learning what real loss weighs, and next to that, these three, with all their noise, weighed almost nothing. Three of them, her husband, his family, and the stranger wearing his hand on her back like a trophy. Triple betrayal, at a gate, on the worst night of her life, with her mother barely in the ground. You would forgive her for breaking. Anyone would. But watch closely, because Simone did the strangest thing. She reached up and touched something at her collarbone, a small brass pendant on a thin chain, the kind of thing you wouldn't look at twice. She held it for one breath, and then she walked, slow and steady, toward the counter where the gate agent stood. They thought they'd left her with nothing. I'll tell you now. But what happened next, no one at that gate saw coming. Let me take you back. Before the airport, before the smile, before the money. Because you cannot understand what Simone did that night until you understand where she came from. She grew up in a narrow house on a loud street, the kind of block where everybody knew your business, and half of them wanted to help, and half of them wanted to watch. Her mother, Loretta, worked 2 jobs. Mornings cleaning offices downtown, nights on her feet at a diner where the tips were thin and the hours were long. There was no father in the picture, not in any way that mattered. There was just Loretta and Simone, and a kitchen table with a wobbly leg. They didn't have much, but they had that table, and at that table, Loretta taught her daughter everything. She taught her how to stretch a small meal to feed a neighbor who knocked. She taught her that the loudest person in the room is usually the most afraid. She taught her that a woman's worth is not in what she shows, but in what she can carry without falling. And she taught her over and over, in 100 small ways, that patience is not the same thing as weakness. That some people wait because they have already lost, and some people wait because they are choosing the exact right moment to move. Simone was the second kind. She just didn't know it yet. One night, Simone couldn't have been more than 14. Loretta came home late, feet swollen, apron still smelling of the diner. She sat down heavy, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small brass pendant. It wasn't gold. It wasn't worth anything you could sell. It was a plain little thing she'd bought from a street table for the price of a cup of coffee. But she'd had 3 words engraved on the back of it. Rise, don't beg. She pressed it into her daughter's palm and closed the girl's fingers around it. Baby, she said, the world is going to look at you and decide you're small. Let 'em. Let 'em think it. But you and me, we know different. When they knock you down, and they will knock you down, you don't crawl, you don't beg, you rise. You hear me? I hear you, Mama. Say the words. Rise, don't beg. Remember that pendant. It matters more than the money. It matters more than anything I'm about to tell you. Young Simone was a soft girl. Too soft, some people said. She was the one who gave her lunch to the kid who had none. She was the one who cried at other people's funerals. She forgave easy, loved easy, trusted easy. And later, much later, that softness is exactly what people mistook for weakness. They saw a gentle woman and assumed a small one. People took from her, the way people always take from the generous. A cousin borrowed and never paid back. A friend used her name and left her the bill. Each time, Loretta would watch her daughter absorb it without complaint, and each time she'd say the same thing. Baby, being kind don't mean being blind. You can love people and still count what they cost you. Simone learned to count quietly. She never let anyone see the ledger, but she kept one. But there was something else about that girl, something that didn't show. At night, when the street finally got quiet, Simone would sit at that wobbly table with a worn notebook and she would draw routes, lines across a map, little planes and trucks and boxes moving from one city to another. She read about how goods traveled, how packages crossed a country, how the whole invisible machine of the world moved things from where they were made to where they were needed. She'd trace a delivery from a factory to a doorstep, and something in her lit up. "What you drawing, baby?" Loretta asked her once, looking over her shoulder at the tangle of lines. "How everything gets where it's going," Simone said. Loretta laughed, soft and warm. "You're gonna move the whole world one day." Nobody took the notebook seriously. A poor girl on a loud street sketching cargo routes by a bare bulb. Who was going to take that seriously? Where does a dream like that even go? Hold that question. We'll come back to it. But first, let me tell you about the last time Simone saw her mother alive, because you should know what kind of grief she was carrying through that terminal. Loretta had been fading for weeks in a narrow hospital room. Simone had sat by that bed every night she could, holding the thin hand that had once held coins at a kitchen table. And on the last clear evening, when her mother surfaced from the fog for just a moment, Loretta looked at her grown daughter and smiled. "You still got it?" she whispered. "Dependent?" Simone drew it out from under her collar. "Every day, Mama." "Good." Loretta's eyes drifted toward the ceiling, toward something Simone couldn't see. "There's gonna come a day, baby. A hard one. A day they think they finally got you." She squeezed, weak but sure. "That's the day you show them who you always were. Not before. You wait for it. You'll know it when it comes." "How will I know?" "You'll feel it," her mother said, like the whole room holding its breath. Those were near the last real words Loretta spoke. 3 days later she was gone, and Simone flew home carrying a grief so heavy it should have crushed her. Carrying it straight into an airport where 3 people were waiting to prove her mother right. The whole room holding its breath. Remember that. You'll feel it too when we get there. Now, back to the present. Back to the cold bench near the gate where Simone sat alone after they'd walked away laughing. Because the story doesn't jump straight from the pendant to the reveal. That's not how breaking works. First, a person has to almost drown. Darius hadn't always been cruel. That's the part that hurts the most, and it's the part you need to understand, because a cartoon villain is easy to hate and easy to forget. A real one gets under your skin. When Simone met him, Darius was charming and ambitious and just a little afraid, though she didn't see the fear back then. He came from a family that talked a lot about status and never quite had the money to back it up. Gloria had raised her sons on the idea that the world owed them a certain kind of respect, and both boys grew up hungry for it and a little ashamed of how far they'd have to reach. Darius married Simone when they were both young and had nothing, and for a while that was fine. But somewhere along the way, he started borrowing. A little at first, then more. He bought the car that looked right, the watch that looked right, the lifestyle that made his mother proud at church and his brother jealous at dinner. And every year the hole underneath it got deeper, and every year he got better at hiding it. By the time we reached that airport, Darius was drowning in a debt so quiet that even Brianna didn't know the truth. He owed people who don't send polite letters, and the thing about a drowning man is this. He will grab whatever's nearest and push it under to lift himself up, even his wife, especially his wife. Because here's what really scared him. Simone had always been the calm one, the capable one, the one who quietly solved things while he made noise. Over the years, without him ever noticing exactly when, her steadiness had started to feel like a mirror, and a drowning man cannot see himself clearly. Then Brianna arrived. She was ambitious in a colder way. She'd grown up watching her own mother get left with nothing, and she had promised herself she would never be the woman who ends up with nothing. So she looked at Darius, the car, the watch, the confident mouth, and she decided he was a ladder worth climbing. She fed him what he wanted to hear. Your wife holds you back. Your wife is beneath your family. A man like you deserves more." She didn't know the ladder was hollow. She didn't know the money was borrowed. She saw the costume and believed the man. That was her mistake, and it would cost her. And the family, Gloria and Andre, had been whispering divorce for a year. Clean the name, trade up, get rid of the quiet woman who never quite bowed low enough. They assumed Simone brought nothing to the marriage worth keeping. No money, no leverage, no way to fight back. She let them think it. She let all of them think it. Do you want to know when Simone first learned about Brianna? It wasn't a text. It wasn't a lipstick stain. It was smaller than that, and it cut deeper. It was a Tuesday, months before the funeral. Her mother had just taken a turn, and Simone had come home early, hollowed out, wanting nothing but her husband's arms. She heard him on the phone in the next room. She heard him laughing, a warm, easy laugh she hadn't heard aimed at her in years. And she heard him low and tender say, "Don't worry about her. She's nobody. She's just furniture." Furniture. 14 years, and she'd become a chair he'd stopped seeing. She didn't burst in. She didn't scream. She stood in the hallway with her hand pressed over her own mouth so he wouldn't hear her breathing, and she let the words settle into her, like a stone dropped into deep water. And here is the thing you need to understand about a patient woman. She did not decide to forgive him. She did not decide to leave him. She decided to wait, to watch, to let him show her exactly who he was all the way to the bottom, so that when the moment came, there would be no doubt left in anyone's mind, least of all her own. She just didn't know the moment would come at a gate, with her mother 3 hours in the ground. So there she sat, on that cold airport bench, and for one long moment the lies almost won. Her phone was dead in her hand. Darius had blocked her number that morning, cut her off from the world so she couldn't even call for help. Her mother was gone. Her husband was gone, walking to a plane with another woman. And she was alone in a bright terminal full of strangers who had watched her be humiliated and done nothing. For one moment, Simone believed them. For one moment, she thought, maybe I am small. Maybe I am nothing. Maybe 14 years of being patient and gentle and good just makes you the easiest person in the world to throw away. Have you ever been there? That cold place where the cruel voices become your own voice? Her fingers found the pendant again. She turned it over without looking. She didn't need to see the words. She'd known them since she was 14. Rise, don't beg. Something in her steadied. It was a woman deciding. She stood up. She smoothed herself down, slow and calm, the way you settle something before you set it in motion. And she walked to the counter, not to plead, not to cry, not to ask for pity. She walked up to the gate agent, a young man named Terrell, with tired eyes and a name tag slightly crooked, and she said 6 quiet words. "Please look up who I am." Terrell blinked. It was a strange thing to say. "Ma'am?" "My legal name," Simone said gently. "Run it. Not the ticket, the name. And then look at who owns the aircraft you're about to board." She wasn't asking for a favor. She was about to remind the world who she was. Now let me tell you what happened to that notebook. Let me tell you where a poor girl's drawings of cargo routes actually went. Because this is the part they never bothered to learn. Simone never stopped drawing those routes. She just grew up and started drawing them for real. While Darius was busy buying the costume of a big man, Simone was quietly building the actual thing. It started small, one contract, moving freight for a company nobody had heard of, then 2, then a route. then a fleet of trucks she leased before she owned. She worked at the kitchen table long after her mother had passed the diner apron down to memory. She registered a holding company with a plain name that meant nothing to anybody, and she tucked her whole life's work under it, quiet as breath. She didn't tell the family. Do you know why? Because the first time she'd mentioned an idea, years ago, Gloria had laughed and Darius had told her to be realistic. So she stopped mentioning. She let them believe she was the small woman doing small things. And in the silence they left her, she built. Trucks became planes. One cargo plane became a fleet. Routes became a network that crossed the whole country, moving the invisible machine of the world, the boxes, the goods, the everything gets where it's going that a 14-year-old had sketched by a bare bulb. She bought struggling regional carriers when they were cheap and made them run right. She bought the ground contracts. She bought the leases on the terminals themselves. Here's the money truth, and I'll only tell it to you plain this once. The woman they were mocking over the cost of a single seat could have bought every plane on that tarmac and never felt it. The empire she'd built quietly over 10 patient years was worth more than most small nations, a fortune with 10 zeros behind it. The kind of number that stops meaning anything and just becomes weather. And the airline whose gate they were standing at, the aircraft Darius had given away her seat on, the terminal Gloria was laughing in. Her holding company owned all of it. Terrell's fingers moved across the keyboard. He typed the name she gave him. He hit enter, and the screen changed.
He read it once. He read it twice. His face went still in a way that had nothing to do with customer service, because at the very top of the ownership record, flagged, verified, the name every employee of that carrier was trained to recognize and never expect to see in person, was the name of the woman standing quietly in front of him in the clothes she'd worn to bury her mother. That's why he froze. That's what he saw on the screen. The grieving woman they'd thrown away owned the sky they were about to fly through. Terrell stepped back from the counter. He picked up a phone. He spoke low and fast, and within 90 seconds, a supervisor appeared. Then the supervisor made a call, and a station manager appeared. Then the station manager went pale and made a call, and the head of airport operations came walking fast across the terminal, straightening his jacket, saying "ma'am" before he'd even reached her. Darius and Brianna were near the jet bridge now, boarding passes in hand, laughing at something. Gloria and Andre trailed behind, Andre still filming, still narrating his little show. They didn't notice the tide had turned. They didn't notice the men in uniform gathering around the woman they'd left on the bench. But the crowd noticed, and the crowd got quiet. "Ma'am," the operations chief said to Simone, low and urgent, "I am so sorry. We had no idea you were traveling tonight. Whatever you need, anything at all." And that's when Darius turned around. Watch his face. This is the moment. This is the one you replay. He saw his wife, the woman he'd stranded, the woman he'd handed to his mistress like a canceled reservation, standing at the center of a circle of the airline's most senior people, all of them leaning toward her, all of them waiting on her word. And he laughed, because the mind protects itself, because it couldn't be what it looked like. "What is this?" he called out, walking back, that easy smile flickering now. "What's going on? Simone, what did you do?" She turned to him, slow, calm, and when she spoke, she never had to. "I didn't do anything, Darius," she said. "I just stopped letting you not know." He didn't understand. Neither did Brianna, who had come back too, sensing something wrong, clutching the boarding pass a little tighter. The operations chief cleared his throat. "Sir, I have to ask you to step back. This aircraft and this carrier are the property of a holding group, and the owner of that group," he glanced at Simone, almost reverent, "the owner is standing right here." The terminal went so quiet you could hear the announcements from 3 gates down. So quiet it was like the whole room was holding its breath. And there it was, the moment her mother promised her on that hospital bed. Simone felt it land in her chest, the hush, the turning, the exact right second she'd been told to wait for. You'll know it when it comes. She knew it now. Andre's phone was still up, but his hand was shaking now, and the little narration had died in his throat. Darius's mouth opened and closed. No, that's not possible. Simone doesn't have that kind of money. She works from the kitchen table. She turned to his wife, and for the first time in 14 years, he really looked at her. "Who are you?" "I'm the woman you called furniture," Simone said quietly. The color left his face. He hadn't known she'd heard. He would spend a long time wondering what else she had heard, what else she had seen, how long she had known, never understanding that a patient woman sees everything and says nothing until the saying counts. Let me tell you about the reversal, because it was a quiet one, and the quiet ones are the ones that last. Brianna looked down at the boarding pass in her hand, the only seat, the prize she'd taken so smugly, and she understood all at once that she'd climbed a ladder that had nothing at the top. The money she'd smelled on Darius was borrowed. The real fortune, the staggering one, had been standing behind him the whole time in the shape of the woman she'd helped humiliate. Simone stepped toward her, held out one open hand. "Keep it," Simone said softly, nodding at the boarding pass. "It's the last thing of mine you'll ever hold." Brianna's face crumpled. She set the pass down on the counter like it had burned her. Then Simone turned to Darius, and here I want you to lean in, because a woman who has been silent for 14 years chooses her few words carefully. You didn't cancel my flight. You canceled yourself. He started to speak. She wasn't finished. Gloria pushed forward, her cruelty reaching for its old reliable weapon, her mouth already opening. "Now listen here, girl. You don't—" Simone looked at her mother-in-law. 14 years of the girl Darius married. 14 years of introductions like apologies. And she said, quiet as a closing door, "You filmed the wrong woman." And then the strangest, most beautiful thing happened. The phones that had been pointed at Simone all night, Andre's and the strangers who'd laughed, began one by one to turn toward Darius, toward Gloria, toward Brianna. The camera that was meant to record a woman's humiliation swung around and caught the faces of the people who'd caused it. In real time, the cruelty reversed. The show they'd made of her became a show of them. No screaming, no slap, no scene. Just a slow, silent turning of the light until the 3 of them stood exposed in it, blinking, small. The operations chief offered Simone his arm. "Ma'am, we have a private cabin ready whenever you'd like, or your own aircraft can be brought around if you prefer." "My own is fine," she said. Because of course it was. She owned those too. Now, you might think that's the end. The reveal landed, the crowd turned, the villains stood exposed. But cruelty doesn't just get exposed, it gets paid. Let me tell you what fell on them after that, because it fell hard and it fell fast.
Darius went home that night to a life already cracking underneath him. When a man builds his whole self on borrowed money, all it takes is one person deciding to stop protecting him. And Simone, quietly, without a single cruel word, simply stopped protecting him. She had known about the debts for years. She had been the invisible hand that kept the worst of them at bay, quietly settling the frightening ones so the people he owed wouldn't come to their door. He never knew. He thought he was clever. He thought he was getting away with it. He never once wondered why the truly dangerous creditors had gone quiet. Never guessed it was her small, patient wife standing between him and the flood. The morning after the airport, that hand lifted and the flood came. The car went first, then the watch, and the other watch, and the costume of a big man, piece by piece. The people he owed, the ones who don't send polite letters, came looking, and there was no quiet wife anymore to stand between him and them. His credit collapsed like a tent in a storm. The lifestyle that made Gloria proud at church evaporated in a matter of weeks, and the whole congregation watched it go. He tried to reach Simone, of course. Once the ground opened under him, he remembered he had a wife. He called from a number she didn't recognize since she'd finally unblocked nothing and simply moved on. When she answered, his voice had lost all its easy music. "Simone, baby, we can fix this. 14 years, that's gotta mean something. I made a mistake. One mistake." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said the only thing left to say. "You didn't make a mistake, Darius. You made a choice at a gate in front of my mother's memory. A mistake is something you don't see coming. You looked right at me and smiled." "Please," he said. And the pride was gone from him now, all of it. And what was left was just a frightened man in an empty house. "Goodbye, Darius." And this time, she was the one who hung up. Brianna was gone before the second week. She'd chosen Darius for a fortune that turned out to be a shadow, and the moment the shadow thinned, she left the way she'd come, quick, cold, calculating. She said something cruel on her way out, the way people do when they're really just ashamed. She'd traded her conscience for a ladder to nowhere, and now she had neither. Last anyone heard, she was climbing some other man, still convinced the top of the ladder was real this time. And the family? Oh, the family. Remember Andre's phone? Remember all that filming, all that narrating, all that glee? The footage got out. Not the version Andre wanted, not the humiliation of Simone, the other version, the one where the light turned. Somebody in that terminal was recording too, and what spread wasn't a video of a small woman being thrown away. It was a video of 3 people learning on camera that they had tried to strand the quiet owner of the very airline at her own mother's funeral. Gloria's face, Andre's shaking hand, Darius's collapsing smile. It went everywhere Andre promised Simone's shame would go, and then further.
Gloria, who had spent 14 years telling everyone that Simone wasn't good enough for her son, now got to hear the whole world ask why her son hadn't been good enough for Simone. There's a particular justice in that. The story she'd told became the story told about her. And Simone? She didn't gloat, not once. She didn't post, she didn't gloat, she didn't return a single cruel word. She signed one document that morning, a document that let the walls she'd been holding up finally fall. And then she boarded her aircraft, and she did not look back. Her silence was never surrender. It was the sound of a woman who had finally decided she was done being small. The plane lifted, the city shrank beneath her, and for the first time in a very long time, Simone breathed all the way out. Let me bring you home now, gently, because a story like this shouldn't end at the height of the fall. It should end where the healing starts. A week later, Simone drove out alone to the cemetery where Loretta was buried. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of soft gray sky her mother used to love. She walked the row until she found the stone, still new, the earth still settling, and she knelt down in front of it. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. What do you say to the woman who taught you how to rise? She reached up and unclasped the thin chain from around her neck. She held the little brass pendant in her open palm, the plain thing worth a cup of coffee, the most valuable thing she owned. She turned it over and read the 3 words she'd read 10,000 times. Rise, don't beg. She set it on top of the headstone, just for a moment, just long enough to say it. I did, Mama. They knocked me down, and I didn't beg. I rose. Then she picked the pendant back up, because some things you carry, and she fastened it around her neck again where it belonged. She sat there a while and she told her mother the rest, the way you do, out loud, to someone who can't answer but somehow still hears. She told her about the notebook, about the roots, about the whole invisible machine of the world she'd built while nobody was looking. She told her the 14-year-old at the wobbly table had done exactly what her mother said she would. You told me I'd move the whole world one day, Simone said, and she laughed, wet-eyed. I didn't think you meant it literal. And here is what Simone did next, and this is the part I most want you to remember. She didn't spend her fortune buying back the costume Darius had loved. She didn't build a palace or chase revenge or wear her money like armor. Instead, she took a piece of it, a real piece, a life-changing piece, and she started something in her mother's name. A program for quiet, overlooked women. The ones raising children alone on loud streets. The ones working 2 jobs and sketching impossible dreams by bare bulbs. The ones the world looks at and decides are small. She gave them what Loretta had given her. Not just money, though there was money and it changed real lives the way her mother had once said the right amount could change everything. She gave them the words. She had them engraved on a small brass pendant, plain and cheap and priceless, and she pressed one into every pair of hands. Rise, don't beg. Because Simone understood something that her husband, in all his borrowed grandeur, never did. Kindness isn't weakness. A gentle woman is not empty one. The softest hands in the room are very often the ones holding the most power. They just don't need to show it to know it's there. She never became cruel. The betrayal didn't harden her, it clarified her. She stayed the girl who gave away her lunch. She just stopped letting the hungry mistake her for something they could take. The last time anyone saw Simone that season was she was sitting by a wide window in a quiet house that was finally entirely her own, watching the gray sky do what gray skies do. No husband who resented her, no family that mocked her, no stranger wearing her life like a costume. Just peace. The deep, earned kind, the kind that can only grow in the ground where cruelty used to stand. She was free. She was whole, and she was at last unbothered by every person who had ever mistaken her grief for weakness. Her silence was never surrender. It never had been. It was a fortune of its own, held quietly, spent only when it mattered, and it had always, always been worth more than they could count. So here's the truth I want you to carry out of this story. The one thing worth keeping when the rest fades. Never measure a person by how quietly they carry their pain. Never mistake gentleness for emptiness, or patience for weakness, or silence for surrender. The people the world decides are small are so often the ones holding the whole sky. Be kind to the quiet ones. And if you are the quiet one, rise. Don't beg. Rise. If Simone's silence taught you something tonight, don't keep it to yourself. Like this story so a woman who feels invisible subscribe for more stories where the underestimated rise. Did you feel it coming? Watch the next one.